Well, we're at the Boyer farmstead, and behind me is the Boyer barn, which was built in 1860. It's one of the oldest barns still standing within Ebey's Reserve as well as Whidbey Island. The Boyer barn is part of our what we're calling our community restoration project, or what we're calling our another form of a community barn raising, right? And instead of the community coming together to build a new barn, what we've done is we've teamed up the National Park Service staff and the community to help restore one of our historic buildings every season, every year. You could hardly walk in here when we first got to the site last summer. I think one of the greatest images I remember is the old farm truck, International Harvester, sitting out here, and folks in here with pitchforks throwing the hay out of the barn 50, 60 years after it had been placed in the barn. And that great circle, and what I certainly recognized was that every generation has its job. And part of the job of this generation is to help restore these heritage buildings and find new uses for them.
So behind me is the Jacob Ebey house it was built in the mid-1800s, and it's an excellent example of adaptive reuse. This will eventually be a visitor contact center.
So the reserve was established in 1978. It was America's first National Historical Reserve. And it really came about because Ebey's Prairie was slated for development. When the community saw those 5-acre home sites for sale and the signs up and roadways that had been placed in the landscape, they really sort of woke up and said, we don't want our community to become like so many other communities across the country. We want to really protect this resource. And for the first 10 years after the reserve was established, the National Park Service worked with the local community to create and establish the first conservation plan.
This is the interior of the ferry house, and back when we were doing the initial stabilization, we constructed some temporary 2x6 walls. And what this does, it stabilizes the structure of the building in a way that enables us to buy some time to come up with a more permanent solution. So here's a historic building element from last century, 1800s, when they would use newspaper to cover cracks between the boards to insulate it to some extent. It's pretty wild to come to a place like this and think, oh, that actually happened here.
And so when you look across the landscape, you look across Ebey's Prairie or Crockett Prairie or in downtown Coopville, you're connected through generations back into the 1800s and even beyond and before that to the early exploration of Puget Sound. So when you think about how Puget Sound was settled and what the pioneer experience was and what the Indian experience was before that time, that's evident. That experience and that human impact connection and evidence is still here within Ebey's Reserve.